The millionaire's wife vanished from a locked estate room with no signs of forced entry, leaving behind untouched jewelry and a half-written letter. This chilling incident occurred in the affluent neighborhood of Shadyside, Pittsburgh, in the spring of 1887. Margaret Halberton, wife of steel magnate Thomas Halberton, was known in social circles for her reserved charm and refined tastes. She lived a seemingly idyllic life, often seen at charity galas and afternoon teas. Always elegantly dressed and gracious in conversation. But beneath the surface, the Halbertons' marriage was rumored to be strained. While Thomas was frequently away on business, Margaret was left alone in the estate's vast halls, accompanied only by a staff that respected her distance and rarely spoke of what happened behind the grand doors. The day before her disappearance, Margaret hosted a small luncheon for two close friends, both prominent women in Pittsburgh society. According to their later testimonies, she appeared slightly distracted but insisted everything was fine. That evening, she retired early to her suite on the third floor, attended by her personal maid who helped her prepare for bed. The maid, Rose Pennington, later stated that Margaret requested a writing desk be placed near the window, mentioning a letter she intended to finish before sleeping. That letter, later found incomplete, contained vague allusions to needing to escape the weight of things unspoken and referenced an unnamed individual whose return she feared. The next morning, Margaret was gone. The door to her suite was locked from the inside, and none of the windows were open. The only clue to her presence was the half-written letter on the desk and a teacup beside it, still faintly warm according to the housekeeper who discovered the scene. The jewelry box atop her vanity, containing emerald earrings and a diamond pendant gifted by her husband, had not been touched. Her wardrobe appeared undisturbed, with no indication that she had packed a bag or taken a change of clothes. Perplexing of all, there was no sign of a struggle, no footprints or smudges on the polished floor, no open window through which she might have climbed or been taken. Investigators were summoned immediately. The local constable, James Rutledge, arrived within the hour. Along with two detectives from the Pinkerton agency hired by Thomas Halberton, they searched every inch of the estate, questioning staff, examining doors and windows, and even sending divers to inspect the estate's ornamental pond. Nothing yielded a single viable lead. The room remained locked with its heavy brass key, found on the writing desk where Margaret presumably placed it before vanishing. Initial speculation suggested suicide, but with no body and no farewell note. This theory quickly lost credibility. Moreover, her close friends refuted the idea that Margaret had shown signs of depression or despair. Attention then turned to the letter. Penned in her distinctive sloping script, it was addressed simply to T. The letter began with personal sentiments, referencing the passage of years and a shared history full of sorrow and silence. But the tone shifted in the second paragraph, where she described dreams that whisper warnings and spoke of someone waiting in the walls. Analysts and handwriting experts examined the letter for forgeries, hidden messages, or codes, but nothing conclusive emerged. The second page was blank, as if she had paused mid-thought and never resumed writing. The servants were interrogated thoroughly. Rose Pennington remained adamant that nothing unusual had occurred during the night. She claimed not to have heard any disturbances, though the estate's thick walls and Margaret's preference for solitude could have easily masked any activity. The butler, Mr. Evans, mentioned hearing light footsteps around midnight in the hallway outside Margaret's suite, but dismissed them as his imagination. The cook recalled that Margaret had sent back her dinner the night before, saying she had no appetite, something rare for her. What troubled the investigators most was the sheer impossibility of the circumstances. Room on the third floor, leaving behind no indication of where she had gone or how. No one had been seen entering or exiting the estate that night, and the security gates had remained closed and locked. The newspapers erupted with theories, from sensational claims of kidnapping by spiritualists to the more mundane possibility of a secret lover spiriting her away. One editorial in the Pittsburgh Gazette even posited that she had discovered an unknown passageway in the house and used it to flee. That possibility prompted a full architectural survey of the Halberton estate. Blueprints were examined, and carpenters were brought in to tap walls and search for hollow spaces. A small crawl space was found behind a wardrobe on the second floor, but it led nowhere and was too narrow for anyone to move through comfortably. Still, rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed Margaret had gone mad and wandered into the woods. Others claimed to have seen a woman matching her description in nearby towns, though each sighting turned out to be false. Thomas Halberton, for his part, appeared visibly shaken. Known for his stoicism, he became increasingly reclusive, avoiding social engagements and rarely speaking to the press. He offered a substantial reward, $5,000, for any information leading to his wife's return. His private investigators followed dozens of leads across Pennsylvania and beyond, tracking down false identities, intercepted letters, even seances conducted by mediums who claimed Margaret was trapped between worlds. None of it produced anything tangible. Whispers also began to circulate about Thomas himself. Some suggested he had grown weary of his wife and staged the disappearance to rid himself of her without scandal. Others believed Margaret had uncovered something about her husband's business dealings and paid the price for knowing too much, yet no evidence was found to implicate him or any member of the household. In time, public interest waned, and the case faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies and triumphs in the ever-evolving city. But among Pittsburgh's older families, the tale of Margaret Halberton's disappearance remained a chilling fireside mystery, a story whispered in drawing rooms and classrooms alike, kept alive by the eerie silence she left behind. A local servant claimed to see a veiled woman boarding a train to Philadelphia the next morning, but her identity was never confirmed. The statement came from 19-year-old Ezra Colby, a junior porter employed at the East Liberty train depot on the morning of May 4, 1887. Colby was on early shift duty, assisting passengers with baggage and checking the schedule boards, when he noticed a woman standing alone at the edge of platform B. According to his testimony given to both the Pinkerton investigators and the local constable, the woman appeared to be dressed in a long, deep blue traveling coat and wore a dark lace veil that obscured most of her face. What caught his attention, he claimed, was not her attire but the way she moved. Nervous, almost furtive, as though she expected someone to stop her at any moment. Colby initially assumed she was a grieving widow, or perhaps a woman traveling to attend a funeral, as veils of that kind were associated with mourning. But he began to suspect otherwise when she approached the conductor of the 7:10 a.m. Philadelphia-bound express and handed over a small slip of paper rather than a standard ticket. The conductor accepted it with little more than a glance, nodded, and escorted her to the last passenger car, which was unusually empty that morning. When questioned later, the conductor, Walter Beecham, acknowledged the interaction, but said he couldn't recall specific details about the woman, noting only that she spoke very softly and never removed her veil. What deepened the mystery was that no ticket under the name Margaret Halberton, or any of her known aliases, was recorded for that morning's train. The Halbertons' private ledgers showed no authorized travel, and none of the estate staff claimed to have escorted Margaret anywhere beyond her bedroom the night before. Ezra Colby maintained his account, insisting the woman bore a striking resemblance to the widely circulated portrait of Margaret that had appeared in the Pittsburgh Gazette just 2 days later. In that image, Margaret was painted with a characteristic tilt of the head and a delicate jawline that Colby insisted matched the woman at the station. However, with her face mostly hidden by the veil and no one else able to confirm the sighting, his claim was never substantiated. Investigators followed the train's route to Philadelphia, stopping at each station and interviewing both passengers and employees. No one else recalled seeing a veiled woman board at East Liberty, and none of the passengers remembered such a figure disembarking at any stop. Once in Philadelphia, the Pinkerton agents canvassed hotels, boarding houses, and women's shelters, showing Margaret's portrait and questioning locals. A few individuals believed they may have seen a similar woman at the reading terminal or in the Market Street area, but again, nothing definitive emerged. Not a single hotel register bore her name or any handwriting resembling hers, and no lady matching her description was reported checking into a residence under a false identity. There were, however, whispers in the underground that suggested a woman of high society had been seen entering a home on Arch Street known for discreet lodgings and even more discreet clientele. The house was operated under the guise of a widow's recovery home. But rumor had it that it often served as a refuge for women fleeing their marriages, especially those tied to powerful or politically connected men. The lead was followed, and the proprietress, a stern woman named Mrs. Murdstone, allowed the agents to inspect her guest ledger, though no entries matched Margaret's name. 2 lines appeared to have been erased with a sharp knife just days after her disappearance. When asked, Murdstone claimed she occasionally removed names at guests' request to protect their privacy, especially those recovering from mental strain. With no way to prove otherwise, the trail went cold once more. Meanwhile, back in Pittsburgh, Ezra Colby's reputation began to suffer. Some accused him of fabricating the entire story for attention, while others suggested he was bribed to create a false lead. The young porter held firm to his account, even as newspapers began to paint him as either a deluded boy or a poor soul manipulated by unknown hands. His supervisors at the depot eventually reassigned him to freight duty, claiming he had become a distraction at the passenger terminal. Colby wrote several letters to local journalists, defending his credibility, and even begged to take a lie detector test, though such technology was decades away from reliable use. Over time, Ezra's account became one of the most hotly debated aspects of the case. Some amateur sleuths treated his testimony as a critical piece of the puzzle, believing it pointed to a carefully orchestrated escape by Margaret Halberton. According to this theory, she had either bribed or blackmailed the conductor, used a forged railway document to board the train, and slipped away to Philadelphia, where she assumed a new identity. Proponents of this idea argued that Margaret had grown weary of her life of wealth and surveillance and longed for a different kind of existence. They speculated that perhaps she had suffered a trauma, recorded, unspoken, and that fleeing was the only means of salvation she could imagine. Others, however, viewed Colby's story as nothing more than coincidence. A woman in a veil boarding a train was not a rare occurrence in 1887. Morning customs, clement weather, and Victorian fashion all offered plausible explanations. Moreover, critics pointed out that even if the woman bore a resemblance to Margaret, there was no actual proof it was her. No luggage was checked under her initials. No distinct personal items were recovered from the train car. And no witness beyond Colby and the vague recollection of a distracted conductor could provide further corroboration. The veiled woman theory did inspire a brief resurgence in public interest, with artists and journalists seizing upon the imagery. Penny serials were written about the widow of the rails, a ghostly figure said to haunt train platforms from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. These stories blended elements of the case with supernatural themes, claiming the woman in blue vanished before arriving at her destination, or that she could be seen standing on platforms just before midnight, waiting for a train that never arrived. While these tales were clearly fictional, they kept Margaret's name alive in the public imagination long after the official investigations had slowed to a crawl. Years later, in 1902, an elderly man named Irving Nunn, who once worked as a night janitor at the East Liberty Depot, claimed on his deathbed that he saw Ezra Colby speaking with a woman in a veil that morning, and that she handed him something small, possibly money or a note. He believed Colby had been instructed not to say more than necessary. This revelation was recorded by a family member, but never independently verified. Still, it added another layer of intrigue to the already murky narrative. Whether the woman boarding the Philadelphia-bound train was truly Margaret Halberton or a case of mistaken identity remains unresolved. The image of the veiled woman stepping into the fog of the early morning, hidden in plain sight among strangers and steam, captured the hearts of the public and the obsession of investigators. Her silence, her concealment, and her uncertain fate turned her from a missing person into a myth that blurred the lines between truth, speculation, and legend. Despite multiple private investigations and public theories involving affairs, secret debts, and spiritualist seances, the case remains unsolved to this day. From the moment Margaret Halberton disappeared from her locked room in the spring of 1887, public fascination exploded into a relentless hunt for answers that spanned years, cities, and disciplines. Thomas Halberton, devastated by the loss and unwilling to rely solely on local authorities, spared no expense in hiring investigators from across the country. The most notable among them was Percival D. Langhorne, a former Union intelligence officer turned private detective, known for his meticulous methods and uncanny instincts. Langhorne arrived in Pittsburgh within a week of the disappearance, conducting interviews, analyzing the incomplete letter, and reconstructing the final day of Margaret's known life. His early reports dismissed the possibility of suicide, emphasizing the lack of a body, motive, or signs of despair, and instead focused on psychological and environmental cues that hinted at premeditated flight or strategic abduction. As weeks turned into months, theories began to swirl among society's elite and the working class alike. The most salacious of them involved an alleged affair between Margaret and a young landscape artist named Elias Drexel, who had been commissioned to paint a mural in the Halberton Solarium 6 months prior to her vanishing. Drexel, known for his romantic realism and frequent flirtations, was rumored to have engaged in more than artistic discussions with Margaret during his time at the estate. Several servants whispered about stolen glances, secret meetings in the garden, and a small ivory locket containing his portrait found hidden in one of her drawers. When questioned, Drexel denied any inappropriate relationship, stating he had left the estate weeks before her disappearance and hadn't spoken to her since. While investigators found no concrete evidence linking him to the incident, his presence in the narrative fueled widespread gossip, particularly in society pages and underground pamphlets that thrived on scandal. Another theory pointed toward financial turmoil. Although the Halbertons were among the wealthiest families in Pittsburgh, rumors emerged suggesting that Thomas Halberton's investments in a failed rail line in Ohio had left him with substantial hidden debts. Some believed Margaret had discovered falsified financial records or secret dealings involving company assets being diverted for personal gain. A few months before her disappearance, she had begun requesting detailed account summaries from the estate's steward, a task previously left entirely to Thomas. This sudden interest in household finances struck some as unusual and possibly suspicious. One theory suggested that her knowledge put her in danger, and her disappearance was orchestrated to silence her before any public revelation could damage Thomas's industrial empire. However, no paper trail or financial audit ever uncovered a definitive motive, and Thomas remained a respected figure until his death. A third and particularly curious line of investigation emerged from Pittsburgh's growing spiritualist community. In the late 19th century, seances, spirit boards, and mediumship were not just fringe activities, but popular diversions among the upper class. Margaret had attended at least 3 seances at the home of Mrs. Theodora Lytton, a prominent medium who claimed to communicate with beings across the veil. According to seance attendees, Margaret became increasingly preoccupied with dreams and premonitions in the months before her disappearance. She allegedly spoke of voices in the walls, shadows in the mirror, and a sensation that someone was following her, even within her own home. Mrs. Lytton later claimed that during one session, Margaret had become visibly shaken and whispered, "He's already here," just before the seance circle broke, after Margaret's disappearance. The Halberton estate was visited by at least 4 well-known mediums from cities as far away as Boston and Baltimore. They conducted rituals in the locked bedroom, claiming to sense lingering sorrow, a betrayal from within, and an unspoken pact made in fear. One medium described a vision of Margaret walking backward into a wall of smoke, while another claimed her spirit was trapped in an unfinished hour, repeating the same final moments again and again. While most of the public dismissed these accounts as theater or opportunism, seances generated substantial press attention and added an air of the supernatural to an already strange case. Newspaper coverage varied widely depending on the publication. Some, like the Pittsburgh Chronicle, focused on rational explanations and the steady unraveling of clues, while others, like the sensationalist Pittsburgh Voice, leaned into the paranormal and scandalous angles. Headlines such as "The Ghost," "Bride of Shottyside," and "Vanished Heiress," "Taken by Train" or "Taken by Spirits," kept readers enthralled but often misled public perception. Reporters hounded the Halberton staff, publishing speculations as fact and naming supposed lovers, enemies, and co-conspirators without evidence. At one point, an anonymous letter published in the Cleveland Post claimed Margaret was alive and living under the name Mrs. L. Harrow in a convent in Canada. This prompted yet another fruitless investigation that turned up a woman who bore no resemblance to Margaret at all. As the years passed, the case evolved into something more than a missing persons report. It became a cultural phenomenon. Amateur detectives penned books, hosted lectures, and reenacted scenes from the night of May 3rd. College students at the University of Pittsburgh wrote theses on the psychological implications of the incomplete letter, while criminologists studied the locked room dilemma as a classic case of unexplained disappearance. Poets and novelists fictionalized the event, using Margaret as a symbol of confinement, mystery, and feminine rebellion. Some argued that she had engineered her own disappearance as an act of self-liberation, escaping the gilded cage of privilege, to pursue a hidden life under a new identity. Even decades later, descendants of the Halberton household claimed to receive occasional letters postmarked from distant countries, Brazil, Egypt, India, containing cryptic messages or pressed flowers and unsigned postcards featuring unfamiliar but elegant handwriting. These were often dismissed as hoaxes, though they fed the enduring belief that Margaret may have survived and remained in hiding. In the 1940s, a historian named Charles L. Newcomb tried to reopen the case, gathering old testimonies, newspaper clippings, and estate records to publish a definitive account. His book, The Vanishing of Margaret Halberton, Truth or Illusion, became a bestseller, yet provided no new evidence. Modern attempts to solve the case using technology such as forensic handwriting analysis, and ground-penetrating radar at the estate site have likewise produced no breakthroughs. The Halberton estate was eventually converted into a museum, with one room preserved exactly as it had appeared in 1887, the locked bedroom with the half-finished letter still under glass. Visitors passed through in hushed tones, staring at the polished writing desk, the untouched jewelry box, and the vintage mirror reflecting nothing out of place. Margaret Halberton remains an enigma suspended between fact and folklore, the subject of podcasts, true crime documentaries, and historical conferences alike. Despite the endless re-examinations, no definitive answer has ever emerged, and the truth, if it ever existed in one single form, has long since dissolved into the shadows of history.